Yes. And we are live for our special edition of Tuesday Talk. My mom texted me and she was like, I really enjoyed your Tuesday Talk yesterday. Are you going live today? I said, yes. And I gave her the time. And she said, well, the flash comes on at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to be out at 8. And I was like, all right, Mom. My mom, who taught middle school English for 28 years,
Oh, wow.
said, I'm going to be out. I'm like, all right, Mom. I thought that was so cute. Mm-hmm. So anyway, tonight's going to be a great episode. We need to have these conversations.
Definitely.
I mean, at its core, it's a conversation about the truth.
It is, and it's a truth people don't want to hear. Well, right. Some people don't want to hear. A lot of our people want to hear it.
That's right.
So,
good evening, June Cleaver. So come on in, guests. Come on in. We have a great, she said 30 years. Sorry, Mom. She has. We have a great show for you all tonight. A great show. In the comments, drop in the comments where you are coming in from. That's right, where you are in the world. Let me know where you are. I see my mom is on. Hi, Mom. My moots, my offsets, my newts. D. Weber, 9 Ether is on. Anke Ma'at. We have Shenka, who is a member of the Shrine of Ma'at. Connecticut is in the house. CT. We've got Dallas, Texas in the house. Big Man 29. It's from Los Angeles. Big Man, are you a Lakers fan? Because I'm a Lakers fan to the core. In Connecticut on the radio station, one of the taglines is big man, baby. So that's what I think of when I see Big Man. Come on in, you guys. We have a really powerful show tonight. Come on in. Tell me where you're from. We've got Dr. Chike Akua in the house again. Dr. Akua, when were you on last time? Was it last season?
Yes, it was on last year. Mm-hmm.
It was last year. Okay, so Big Man is a Lakers fan. That's what I'm talking about. See, good people like to show up. So I do. Oh, we see Baltimore, Tanaya, Tamika, Keshut Sao. Welcome from Baltimore. Welcome. Tonight we have Dr. Chike Akua, who is back on Tuesday Talk. Tonight we're going to be talking about the issue of race, the issue of enslavement, the issue, the fact, let me say it again, the fact of enslavement, the fact of who built the foundation of this country, of the United States, who generated the wealth, why these Western nations are so powerful and so rich. And we all know that it's off of the backs of the enslaved Africans in those respective, in the countries that were colonized by said European power. Now, this show, Tuesday Talk, and the internet in general has a worldwide reach, and we all recognize that. But tonight we're going to focus on the United States. We're going to focus on America and the enslaved Africans who built this country. The descendants of those enslaved Africans are foundational Black American. I'm foundational Black American. All 4 of my grandparents come from this country. Okay, we're enslaved in this country. The descendants were enslaved here. And the United States being such a superpower, we have to look at the roots of that power. We have to look at the roots of that wealth, because that power and wealth and the lack thereof and marginalization and those with resources and those without resources is the continuation of how wealth and power was distributed. Okay. Now it's the year 2023, and the form of Africanism, African spirituality, Christianity, education, the role of women, the role of men, incarceration, education, nutrition, skills that we learn, trades that we learn, marriage, the role of children. All of these things have changed over time or have a certain manifestation, but has the power structure really changed? Has the access to wealth and money really changed?
Mm.
Has opportunity changed significantly? These are questions that can be answered by first understanding the root of power and structure and money in this country and where it comes from. And so, although we may not be talking specifically about those elements of power, those elements of distribution, we are going to be talking about the history of it, where it came from, how it's rendered, and if we can talk about it, if we're allowed to even talk about the truth. Now, again, like I said, I'm foundational Black American, all for grandparents. But I'm going to tell you this, you'd be hard pressed to find a Bob Marley song that I don't know by heart. Because my parents were Pan-Africanists. And the truth that came out of Bob Marley's mouth is something that all diasporan Africans need to know. And one of the lines that he said was, "Tell the children the truth." And I heard that song just growing up. Heard Gil Scott Heron, Earth, Wind, and Fire, all of that. Okay. So tonight we're going to be discussing the truth and who wants to tell it, how there is an attempt to tell it, and who doesn't want us telling the truth. So with all of that being said, I'd like to welcome Dr. Chike Akua. Dr. Akua, welcome back to this special edition of Tuesday Talk. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back here with you and looking forward to getting into this topic.
Okay, great. So before we jump into the topic, let's let people know who Dr. Akua is. Can you give us a little bit of your background on your upbringing and your formal education?
Sure. I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, and I am the last of 5 children, which gave me an interesting perspective on the world because my older sister and brothers took very good care of me and insisted that there were certain things that I knew. I went to Hampton University, one of our great HBCUs, for undergrad. I did my master's degree at Clark Atlanta University and my doctorate at Georgia State University. In the process of my education outside of college and graduate school is as significant as my education inside the academy. I came along in undergrad at a really pivotal moment in the midst of the African-centered education movement. So I was deeply influenced by the research and scholarship and practice of Dr. Asa Hilliard, and later on actually had an opportunity to be initiated by him into the Jegna Collective, which was an African educators think tank. I'm also an intellectual child of Nana Dr. Joyce King, who is the Benjamin E. Mays Chair of Education and Policy at Georgia State University. So these are my Jegna, these are my master teachers, these are my Seba who led me and have given me sure guidance on this journey. Also deeply rooted in the work of Nana Dr. John Henrik Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, Tony Browder, Malefi Asante, and many of the African-centered scholars whose voices have provided clarity for our situation here in America and around the world.
That's right.
So that's a little bit about my background. In terms of my profession, I am a teacher transformation specialist and a leadership strategist to urban schools, nationally and internationally, and colleges and universities. And I'm an assistant professor of educational leadership at Clark Atlanta University.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have a guest here who definitely knows about education and the impact of education. So we're going to jump into the 1619 project. I'm going to give you a general overview of it, and then we're going to get into the details. Okay, for those of you who might not know. The 1619 Project is a long-form journalism endeavor developed by Nicole Hannah-Jones, writers from the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine, which aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of foundational Black Americans at the very center of the United States national narrative. The first publication from the project was in the New York Times Magazine of August 2019 to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in the English colony of Virginia. These were also the first Africans in mainland British America, though Africans had been in other parts of North America since the 1500s and before, because we traveled this world before anyone else, period. The project also developed an educational curriculum supported by the Pulitzer Center, later accompanied by a broadcast article, live events, and a podcast. Historians, journalists, and commentators have described the 1619 Project as a revisionist historiographical work that takes a negative view of traditionally reverenced events and people in American history, including the patriots in the American Revolution, the founding fathers, along with later figures such as Abraham Lincoln and the Union during the Civil War. On May 4th, 2020, the Pulitzer Prize Board announced that they were awarding the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Commentary to project creator Nicole Hannah-Jones for her introductory essay. So that is a brief general overview of the 1619 Project. So, Dr. Akua, when you first heard of how did you first hear of the 1619 Project, and what was your first impression of it?
I first heard about it in the news, and I do want to say, as a disclaimer, I'm still in the process of reviewing the book. So I have not completed that review yet, but I can speak on what I have seen of it so far, as well as the backlash against it. Okay. I heard about it through the news and through newspaper articles and commentaries and video commentaries and so forth. And found that, it was refreshing to a lot of us. And then it was it was terribly troubling to those who were against it. And one of the reasons that it was terribly troubling to those that were against it is because the 1619 Project attempts to reframe the national narrative. And anytime you attempt to reframe the narrative of white triumphalism, then that's going to cause some serious problems with those who are patriotic to that notion, that want to elevate and celebrate their ancestors who literally committed genocide against our ancestors. And so those who are the descendants of those that were killed and maimed and murdered and so forth, part of the whole purpose and project of miseducating us is to make us valorize their heroes as if they're our own.
That's
But
right.
Black people and other people are waking up and realizing that these are not our heroes. We will not celebrate them. And not only that, we're going to tell you the truth about them and really start, coming against that. But as I said, anytime you try to reframe the national narrative of miseducation, you're going to run up into some serious problems. All of our scholars that have done that and have faced that. But I do want to say that Nicole Hannah-Jones and the scholars that she has organized, she certainly paid the price for publishing this piece, to the point of death threats and all sorts of unthinkable things. And so we definitely want to, congratulate her and thank her for the efforts that she has made to put this out into the public, to help us to better understand the origin of things. And I think in reframing the founding of the United States, taking it back to 1619, puts the onus of our enslavement, even more of it, on the nation, and sets up an even greater conversation for reparations. And I think that's one of the big fears as well.
Mm-hmm.
ultimately going to be held accountable for what their ancestors did and for what they continue to benefit from.
Hmm. So, it's interesting. When I was preparing for this, I thought about reparations as well, because by acknowledging the consequence and benefit of enslavement, and by acknowledging who benefits and how this country has this intrinsic power built into everything that makes up the United States, including the history that is taught or continue to be taught, in our schools. If there's this acknowledgement of what enslavement was and its consequences that still permeate today, it's like a linear line going forward to the present, and going directly to reparations. Because if you've wronged a group of people so deeply, so economically, so culturally, so historically, there has got to be some reparations to that, especially since there are other examples of reparations that the United States has paid to groups of people when they've been wronged.
Mhm.
And right. And so reparations is definitely something that is being spoken about more in today's conversation, and making an acknowledgement of this piece lends itself to, hey, well, reparations is right around the corner if we acknowledge all of these things as well.
Definitely. It's unavoidable because when you look at the fact that America has paid reparations to just about everybody else except us. And I think one of the reasons it hasn't come to us yet, because I believe it will, but one of the reasons it hasn't come to us yet is because the the bill will be so astronomical that they're wholly unprepared uh, to allow that to happen. But it needs to happen, and I believe it's going to happen one way or the other. And we have to continue pushing for it until it does.
So I'm going to go on this reparations path for just a second. And this is just your opinion. This isn't, guys, this isn't rooted in anything else. I'm just kind of curious what Dr. Akua thinks. When do you think that the United States will get to the point where they give us reparations?
Hmm. I believe that that could take place in the next 5 to 10 years.
Do you think so?
But it's not whether we will receive reparations, it's what kind of reparations we will receive. I'll
Mm.
never forget, probably about 20 years ago, a sister by the name of Dr. Rosie Milligan, I think she was based in LA. She said if they were wise, they would give us reparations now while we were not in our right minds. Because we would turn it right back over to them. If we got it on a Friday, they'd have it back in their hands, the majority of it, Saturday morning. Um, but I think it could happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, I remember when I was a middle school teacher in the 90s, I used to tell my students who, particularly those who said they wanted to be an attorney when they grew up, I told them that by the time they grew up and had the opportunity to go to law school, reparations would be an issue that was kind of front and center and that they should be prepared to argue for it. And here we are now, and many of them are adults in their 30s and 40s and so forth. And now it's more of a common conversation. And we're in the process of making sure that it continues to be a common conversation, and even more so, one that politicians have to answer to.
Hmm. I agree with what you were saying. I didn't think you would think 5 to 10 years. I personally don't think that we'll see it in our lifetime, and because the there's this fight to keep America white. There's this fight to keep the American mind white,
Hmm.
even if America isn't white.
Hmm.
And as white people around the world have about 300 years left on the planet. There's a fight to stay in control of the planet. And even though there's this number of 300, when you look at white, what's white? I see some white folks who have curly hair. They got a nose wide like my daddy. They
Hmm.
might have pale skin, but they don't look like William and Kate. They wanted white folks to look like them.
Hmm.
your average white American, even if they don't have, more African features, they don't have those British features, you know.
Hmm.
I don't know if I discussed it here on this show, but America really makes all the ethnic groups just mutts. Like, you've got different Asians, Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, they're all mixed, and you just have like general Asian face. Then you have white folks, British, Irish, Italian, Russian, and then you just have general white, a white person's features and stuff like that. Same thing with black people, different countries in Africa, the islands, black Americans, and we just kind of look like me, right? So I just think that even with white folks that are here, it's this blend. And then you've got more interracial couples, and now the babies look beige. So even as they have these 300 years, what is white going to look over these next 300 years? I just don't think that there's going to be this group of people who are going to say, okay, we were wrong, and this is what we owe them. One of the reasons is because the monstrosities that happened against African people were just sheer evil. Whipping the skin off of someone's back, performing medical procedures without anesthesia. I mean, who does that? You
Hmm.
can't even do that to a dog without going to jail for that. Throwing babies to alligators. These are things that are provable. Lynching people, raping people in the town square, just vicious, evil
Right.
stuff. So and I don't think the country is 5 to 10 years away from admitting that,
Hmm.
because
Well, if you consider back probably around 1850,
mhm,
1855, um, if you talk to most black folk back then, they probably wouldn't have thought that just a few years later the Civil War would be fought and we would receive our physical emancipation. If you talk
mhm,
to black folks in 1950, uh, many of them probably wouldn't have imagined that 4 years later that schools would have been that the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education
mhm,
decision would have been released, supposedly for the desegregation of schools or the integration of schools. Whether you agree with that or not, most people
mhm.
wouldn't have thought that it would have occurred at that time. If you talk to many of our elders, when former President Obama was elected, they didn't think that they would ever see a day in their lifetime when a black man would be elected president.
Mhm.
While I can see why you would think that it would take much longer, um, I'm still pushing for 5 to 10 years, and
Yeah.
and and um, that's why I think we have to continue this conversation, and
Mhm.
at some point, not maybe in this conversation, but get into the particulars of what that will look like in different areas. What will reparations look like in housing? What will reparations look like in education? What will it look like in healthcare? And be very, very specific,
Right.
particular, because if you're going to push for something like that, there has to be a plan for the demand. In
Right.
absence
Right.
of a plan for the demand, it's just talking, and it doesn't seem like it could happen. But there are people who are working on that plan, who have been working and are working on that plan. And like I said, holding elected officials accountable, making them, putting that on the platform that you have to speak to this issue and tell the public what you think about it. And that will do that very issue may sway elections and so forth. So it's not up to them whether or not it happens. It's really up to us. Abraham Lincoln didn't free African people. African
Speak
people
on it.
freed themselves.
We sure did.
We were the impetus behind the passing of the Voting Rights Act. We were the impetus behind every major progressive movement that took place on our behalf. It wasn't them, it was us. There may have been some of them who came along and gave assistance at some point, but we were the impetus.
Mm. You know, in giving that historical timeline, I could see how reparations is closer than we think it is. And I have a couple comments in here. And again, we should probably just have a separate conversation on reparations. Jason Holmes said Gucci and Louis would get it all back, which is basically what you said. While we still out here buying Louis and Gucci and those eyelashes and following every trend that's on Instagram, and fighting amongst foundational Black Americans, Caribbeans, continental Africans, just distracted by just nonsense.
And that's
Give us
why
the money now
we have to be ready to receive
to
it.
receive it. And
Mhm.
and until there's a shift in the frame of mind and knowing who you are, it would be almost detrimental for us to get it, because we're gonna give it right back, and then where would we be? And again, like I said before, having Pan-African minded parents and growing up like that, when I hear Africans, continental, Caribbean, Latin American, and foundational Black Americans arguing, I just want to beat them all like I'm their mama. Like, what are you doing? This
Mhm.
is dumb. Why are you being distracted by like the carrot that's dangled in front of you? Like, that's just it just doesn't make any sense to me, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I just want to read a couple more comments on reparations, and we're going to get right back on track with making sure we can control, at the very least, what it is that we teach our own children in the
Yeah.
written form of curricula and writing. So, Bawana Haguziki said, "Are reparations just monetary?" I'm thinking slavery took away more than just the ability to produce wealth in America. How does that get repaired? And that's something that you said. What does it look like in healthcare? What does it look like? With reintroducing our spiritual religions. What does it look like in education, which is what we're talking about now? The 1619 project is kind of like education reparations in terms of being able to teach the truth. you know the other comment by Sharon Brinkley was, some reparations are occurring now in a piecemeal way within the states. What do we collectively think reparations should look like? And Jason Holmes said, I think the first item of reparations should deal with mental health. So we definitely have a broader scope on reparations, as it's just not payment, because it's not like you broke into my house and stole $20 and I want my $20 back plus interest, and then nothing else was
Mhm.
broken, nothing else in the structure of living was
Yeah.
destroyed, or you know what I'm saying? Like,
So
you got to do more than give me back my $20.
to give an example from what Jason Holmes said, and what the sister said before,
Hmm.
it definitely has to be more than monetary. But for example, when he mentioned mental health,
Hmm.
um, there would have to be appropriations for us to recover from over 400 years of intergenerational, multi-generational, unaddressed trauma. But
That's right.
in order for that to happen, you have to have funding allocations to train a new generation of Black therapists, counselors, and psychologists in African-centered and culturally relevant therapeutic modalities, because we're not going to get healed with white folks' psychology. That's what got us in this situation.
Thank
So,
you.
so this is why it has to be so much more than monetary. It has to address a number of different areas, and that's why we need scholars and community members from all these different walks of life to begin to weigh in on it and so forth. And yes, it is happening in some places, as
Hmm.
Sharon says, in a piecemeal way. You've got it going on in Asheville, North Carolina, um, in Evanston, Illinois.
Hmm.
California is having hearings about it. But in Evanston and Asheville, reparations is already taking place on a local level, but it needs to occur on a national level, and that's what we need to talk more about. And I would definitely want to recommend that you speak with a brother by the name of Reginald Muhammad, who's written, along with Michael Muhammad, the National Reparations Declaration. He can go into so much more depth on the issue than I can. It has a powerful framework. Both of them have a powerful framework for that.
Interesting. Looks like another edition of Tuesday Talk is just reparations, what
Definitely.
it looks like and all of that stuff. And along with counselors and therapists, I'm gonna say teachers.
Yes,
I
in the education realm,
Yeah,
we don't just have a shortage of Black teachers. We need to raise up a new generation of teachers who have been taught in our tradition
that's right.
and in our methods to bring out the brilliance within our children, so that they know how to release the genius in Black children. That's a whole different type of preparation than what's available now in most of the schools of education that train pre-service teachers. So there has to be funding allocations for that. So this is why this is why I'm agreeing with the sister earlier. It will not just be monetary.
It can't just be monetary,
Hmm.
because it wasn't just a monetary theft.
Hmm.
It was a theft of our minds,
Right, right.
bodies, and everything, history and everything else. Yes, yes, this is definitely something that we're going to continue to discuss. So getting right back to the 1619 project, can you give us some of the information that you've studied and that you know of the 1619 project, and why is this particular this endeavor is so important and so controversial?
Well, again, kudos to Sister Nicole Hannah Jones, for organizing this and for having the moral courage to put it out into the public space, to
Mhm.
make people answer and be accountable to many of the things that she's sharing. When it first came out, my first thought was, um, our story doesn't begin in 1619, as you mentioned earlier.
That's
Uh,
right.
our story goes back thousands of years, whether you want to go back to the African continent, and for many of us, it started right here in America thousands of years ago. So when we read the work of, for example, Dr. David Imhotep in his book, "The First Americans Were Africans," where he gives specific archaeological proof that the African presence in America goes back at least 53,000 years. So it's very interesting when ignorant people, when talking about issues of race and culture and so forth, and somebody ignorant will say, "Well, why don't you go back to where you came from?" Well, I'm here. My people came from here, and some of my people came from Africa. So the question is, where will they go back to? So that was
Yeah.
the first thing that I thought of when I saw the title, the 1619 Project. So our story doesn't begin in 1619, but
Mhm.
I understand and appreciate what she's trying to do in reframing the national narrative that America didn't begin in 1776 with the signing of the Declaration of Independence. All of the elements of what makes America America were going on back in 1619,
That's right.
when those first, I think it was 20 Africans were brought into Virginia at that time, in that dispensation of time. We know we were here already and we were here thousands of years ago, but at that particular time. So I appreciate what she's trying to do to reframe the national narrative and
Mhm.
look at it through the lens of critical race theory. Um, but we've known even before there was such a thing called critical race theory, about the inequities and challenges that we were facing. So I think it's a project and a book that needs to be studied. I understand there's even a program on it now,
Okay.
on one of the streaming platforms. So I think these are all conversations that we need to be engaging in, to begin to hold America accountable for its crimes against us and its crimes against humanity.
That's right. That's right. That is absolutely right. Crimes against humanity. Mm. So thank you for that, and in addressing that. Do you know exactly what the depth and breadth of what they're focusing on? You said it's on. I'm sorry. What was the platform that you said that they have the critical race theory on right now?
There's a program called the 1619 Project. It's on one of the streaming platforms. I don't remember
Oh,
which
okay.
one, but I think it's
Mhm.
like a 6-part series. And
Okay.
so they're going through. I haven't seen that yet either. I
Oh,
heard
okay.
about it, and so that's something I'll be checking out as well.
Okay, yeah. And and for everyone who's watching, we bring you guys stuff that is happening like live now. So sometimes we get it in progress just like you, and there's just some depth of insight as far as what is going on, and which is why we have people here. So, she was also given a Pulitzer Prize for it, which stirred up lots of controversy because the people who are against critical race theory, besides what we know what it is, they don't want to admit how savage they were to other human beings, that their ancestors were that savage. Because in my experience, this is kind of a sidebar, but also yet inclusive of the response to the 1619 Project, is this: if Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is your father, you're probably going to be tall because it's in your genes. You might be athletic because it's in your genes because he's your parent. If Mariah Carey is your mother, you probably can sing because it's genetics, it's in your genes, and Mariah Carey is your mother, right? So if your ancestors did evil, savage things to other human beings, what does that make you?
Mm.
And
What does it say about how you're able to benefit from the wealth that was accrued from the doing of those evil things?
exactly. And that's the second thing. Not only what does that make you, because you are genetically related to these people, you benefit from that savagery.
Mm.
So what does that make you? What does it make you? Your choice. Because you can't help who your parents are, who your people are. You also can't help how you benefit from certain things. But if you aren't taking the time to say, I benefit from that, how am I going to adjust my life so that I don't continue to contribute to that? And people don't ask themselves those questions. That to me, in my opinion, those truths are what a lot of people, the overwhelming majority of people, are running from. What does that make me? I'm
Right.
genetically related, and I've chosen to stay involved by benefiting from it.
It causes cognitive dissonance,
Mm-hmm.
psychologists tell us, and that is where you have um, a very high opinion of something, and then you find out information that contradicts your high opinion
Mm-hmm.
of that thing. So a lot of white Americans have a very high opinion of America and hold it in high esteem and think America is the greatest place on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then they find out some of the atrocities of what we and others have been through. And the understanding of what we and others have been through authentically has been obscured in many places. It's very difficult to find authentic and very revealing information about what we actually went through as a people. The daily physical abuse, the daily sexual abuse,
Mm-hmm.
psychological trauma that we went through, the family separation, the lynching, the castration, just unthinkable things. And so what happens is a lot of Americans are dealing um, with that cognitive dissonance. And one of the effects of cognitive dissonance is it causes you to still uphold that thing that you're holding in high esteem and defend it, even though you have this other contradictory information. But to those that are willing to look at the truths that are uncomfortable to look at, they're going to come to possibly a different set of opinions. And that is the fear that those in power have. But if enough people
Mm-hmm.
start getting this information, they're going to start changing their minds and seeing what we're talking about, and they're going to start to empathize and sympathize with what we're talking about. So they want to put a lid on this kind
That's
of information.
yep.
So one of the things that we know is that lack of knowledge, Black ignorance has been weaponized against us from the time that we first got here.
Mm-hmm.
Information suppression and education suppression was a part of the project of making a slave and maintaining a slave.
Mm-hmm.
That project is still very much in place right now.
You know, I growing up, I went to a really good public school from fourth through fifth grade. I'm sorry, first through fifth grade. In the fourth and the fifth grade, I was in gifted and talented. In the sixth through 12th grade, I was at private school in Connecticut. So I definitely got and then I went to Spelman. So I definitely got a great education. A few years ago, I taught in a prison pipeline school in Connecticut. And to see how systematically and systemically meaning happens in these institutions. It is a part of the institution, right? And systematically means on a day by day basis, this is the system that's in place and that's in the structure and this particular place to maintain whatever it is that's going on. And class after class, these teachers wasted their students' time. And a couple of teachers that I saw that were really trying to give them some good education were hounded and harassed by some of the powers that be in the school. I was a substitute teacher at that school. I was one of the teachers that gave those kids what I got. Why would I water it down? Because they're Black, because they're Black Hispanics and African immigrants. Why would I downgrade that? Why would I, I heard these teachers talk about them, their families, their home, just all kind of, and then you turn around and teach them. And so long story short, I personally did not receive systemic bad education. It was colonized education. I mean, we can say that because that's the truth. And I just remember being in some of my history classes, being like, and saying like, that's not true. Because I had my parents, I had my mother, and I had my father, and I had my upbringing, and I knew certain things, weren't true, which was part of my angst, which is one of the reasons why I went to an HBCU, because I was sick of all of the angst, So, but to continue to have, but the continuation of the misinformation and the lack of information is not something separate from how enslaved Africans were treated as it pertained to education. See, people have to understand that this isn't like some random thing that just like dropped out of the sky. Oh my God, the schools are bad. Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
That is not what is going on. If you look back, you can see the history of the education. It's all colonized. It's all whitewashed. We ain't even talking about that. We're not even talking about that. Right now, what I'm talking about are fundamentals that were taught, like fundamentals in math, fundamentals in reading and phonics and essay writing, learning trades, really being able to think and critically and analytically. That's been taken out of schools. That has been systemically and systematically taken out of schools, where you have Black kids and you have Black people immigrant Black people from all over the world. They haven't taken it out of the prep schools, though. They haven't taken it out of the private schools. I have friends who have kids in private school. I have some friends who are like, yo, Sai, I want my kids to go to your prep school. You know people there? Yes, I do. Called them up, wrote recommendations. They got in. Why? Because there is no prison to pipeline agenda at these prep schools. Why? Because the rich and white kids go there. And smart middle-class kids like me who got in because I'm smart.
Let me go back to something you said earlier when you used the term school to prison pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to help people to reframe that language to say preschool to prison pipeline, because there's data that shows that it is preschool, that as young as 3 years old in preschool, our Black boys are being targeted. Okay. So a couple of the people who brought this to light were Zakiya Sankara Jabbar and her husband, Hashim Jabbar, when they noticed that their son was being targeted in preschool. And Zakiya, had the presence of mind to start doing some research about, she was told that her son needed to be tested after 3 days, and he's 3 years old. And so when she started doing research, she began to see that there was more to this than met the eye. She came across Jawanza Kunjufu's work on countering the conspiracy to destroy Black boys, and later found out that in the state of Ohio, where she was at that time, that I think it was almost 100% of the students who had been suspended in preschool were Black boys.
How are you suspending somebody in preschool?
So they helped to found Racial Justice Now, which influenced policy for them to change the law in Ohio that you cannot suspend a preschool child. So you asked the right question. How do you suspend a child who's in preschool, right? And so there's a lot behind this. So it is, in fact, the preschool to prison pipeline. And I just finished writing and releasing a special report for the Wayfinder Foundation, and it's called Dismantling the Pre-School to Prison Pipeline Through Black Literacy and Education for Transformation. And what I've done is I put that in the chat box. I think it's so that you can see it. So you'll have to make it available to everyone else.
Yep, it's right there.
Yeah, if you go to wayfinder.foundation, you can download that report for free. It's no charge, but it's very revealing when you see the history of how the prison industrial complex was brought into being on our backs, how it how it completely decimated our families and communities as they were building wealth for themselves. Thank you so
Mhm.
much, Yoga Girl Sai. That's somebody else that posted that just now?
No, that's me.
That's
IT
you.
Yoga,
Okay,
Yoga Girl
I'm
Sai.
sorry.
That's
Okay.
okay. That's
Yeah,
me.
so definitely please circulate that. We literally just released it this past Saturday
Mhm.
in Washington, D.C. And we're going to be going around the country and having these forums in communities around the country to inform our people of what's going on. But again, everything that we've been talking about, and really everything on your show in general, is information that we are not supposed to know,
Mhm.
and that we're not even supposed to desire to know or even know that it exists, given the level of miseducation and brainwashing that took place during and after our physical captivity.
That's right.
Yeah, so the purpose of our miseducation was to take us so far away from these cultural realities that we wouldn't know and wouldn't want to know. There's an African proverb that says, not to know is bad, but not to wish to know
Mm.
is
Mm.
worse.
Yep.
Right?
So I'm not gonna call anybody out in my life, anybody black who doesn't wish to know. When I was younger, I don't know if y'all know, but I have some Sekhmet energy. And for those of you who know the story of Oshun, I have Oshun energy. But if you really know both stories, you'll know I'm saying the same thing. I'm gonna just drop that nugget and you can go do your own research. Okay. Grow again, Pan-African parents. I always knew Santa Claus wasn't real. I always knew Jesus was black. And I always knew Africans were the first people on the planet. I knew that so early in my life. I do not remember my parents telling me. I just knew it. Of course, you're not born knowing anything, but I just knew that. Okay. My mom was very matter of fact. She was like Claire Huxtable. I always use her as an example in describing how my mother, comports herself and how she raised me. All right. So when you see something that doesn't make sense and you do your own research, then you find the facts.
Mhm.
So these are the facts, right? So these are the facts. And for a long time I didn't understand why black people would say certain things, do certain things, behave certain ways, look for acceptance with groups of people that don't want to be with them, that don't want them there, or the only way that you could have a whole lot of white friends or be in white spaces is if you allowed them to mistreat you and say whatever they wanted to say, call you the N-word whenever. That wasn't me. I was like, that's not happening with me. As a matter of fact, the first semester I was at my prep school, this guy called me the N word. And I asked my mother the equivalent of the N word for his white ethnicity. And she told me, and I was ready for him because I had told the art teacher she didn't do anything. I told the middle school headmaster he didn't do anything. That's when I asked my mama. She told me. And the next day in art class, we were sitting on our benches and I looked him straight in the face because I was ready for him because I ain't scared. He called me the N word. I gave him his respective European N word equivalent. And I said it loudly enough so all the white kids in the class knew I got one waiting for you too. This was like the first week of class.
Mhm.
And I went through that school for 7 years and I never had anybody get in my face on some nonsense because they knew I got something waiting for you. I
Mhm.
was friendly. I had friends. I was a varsity athlete, all of that. But you're not going to play me.
Right, right.
Now, over the course of my life, not just at school, over the course of my life, I have seen Black people so weak, needing white approval. And I did not understand why. It took me to be an adult, to initiate in the shrine of Ma'at, to become a priestess, to have Anika and Jabari, and mainly Anika, check me when I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing as a priestess. Some people want to be priests and priestesses. They don't understand you're going to get checked. It's going to be humbling,
Mhm.
humbling. All right. And so, but I respect both of them. I know their process. I knew them before I was even initiated, and they live the life they say they do. Right.
Mhm.
So, because I'm listening to them, I started to understand why people do the things they do. And in effect, I'm doing the same thing as those Black people who need white approval. I'm going to explain why. When you look at the savagery, when you look at it, people respond in the way that works for them. And some people are like, I'm gonna just go over on their side and be nice, and maybe they'll be nice to me. I'm gonna tolerate what they say and do, and I'm just gonna find common ground, and we only talk about certain topics or don't go so deep, and then boom, I can live a good life, right? I can have a whole bunch of friends, we can go to the bars and kick it. That's how that person can handle it. Then there's people like me. I ain't having it. I'm gonna call you what you calling me. I'm gonna tell you the truth, or we just ain't gonna be friends. And that's how I feel comfortable, excuse me, dealing with it. And so it taught me some compassion for people who really don't have the strength and who have cognitive dissonance against the facts. However, they are not absconded from learning about themselves, learning the truth and acknowledging it, because at a certain point they're perpetuating it. They've provided this spongy, cushiony, like safe pad to continue to do it. They're a part of the problem. So I say all that to say this. For those people who, you have family members you love, you have friends you love, you meet people on the street, you see people minding their own business coupled up in a way that you question, have some compassion for them, because all of this is very difficult to really kind of wrap your mind around, that human beings do this on a regular basis. And for our lifetime, we're most likely going to continue to see this happen as all of these, it's like the scab has been ripped off and the blood is gushing up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we're gonna keep ripping these scabs off. They're gonna keep trying to put them, we just gonna keep ripping them up. And that's what we're dealing with in this time. Now, again, I was raised by parents who spoke truthfully to me. I'm speaking truthfully to you. If this is landing a little hard, then just brace yourself and accept the fact that it's real. But I really think that we should have some compassion. We're not absconding of their responsibility, but just understand it from a different perspective, that everybody's doing the best they can living in these really crazy times. Just kind of wanted to say that a little bit.
Sure. I think it's important that we understand that a big part of our work is not seeking other people's acceptance.
I know that's right. That's
That
right.
is so very important for us to understand that. What we need to do is seek acceptance amongst ourselves and be clear about what our narrative is.
That's right.
If we are in communication with those outside of our community, it is incumbent upon us to show up as who we are, being who we are, with power and strength, and make other people adjust to our presence rather than us constantly having to adjust to their perspectives and their presence. But yes, you're right. There are so many who have been miseducated with injected oppression, so much so that they seek that acceptance from others. And if they can somehow convince white folks that white folk are in fact racist, or that something is in fact unjust, that they've won a battle of some sort. But the reality is, we have to understand who we are, and as I said, show up in our presence and in our power.
That's
And I
right.
think we would be surprised at how things begin to shift when
Mm-hmm.
we do that without us seeking somebody else's acceptance. But in order for that to happen, we have to be properly educated and socialized in the best of our own traditions, and not wait or expect for others to do that for us. Because even the most well-meaning among them cannot do for us what we must do for ourselves.
That's right. I gotta speak on this. I gotta speak on this. We are the ones who are going to save us. Let me go back one other further step. What are you fighting for? You fighting for white folks to accept you? Then you ain't helping it. You need to go. I love you. I have compassion for you, but beat it, because you're a part of the problem. I'm fighting for Black liberation. What else is there to fight for?
But in the absence of this kind of conversation and the right knowledge, most people don't even know that they are seeking white acceptance.
Well, you know what? Let me jump in and say this, Dr. Kua. In 2023, if people, and I feel like Brother Ray Higgins right now, if people don't know, it's because they don't want to know. There are people who have created these cocoons where they purposely are not getting this information. They are dedicated to ignorance. That is something that I've heard Dr. Ray Hagan say. They
Mhm.
are dedicated to ignorance. And
Right,
so,
right,
you
right.
know what I'm saying? So it's like, let's say you have to learn Russian. You have 6 months to learn as much Russian as you can. But I take no Russian lessons. I say, well, I just don't know Russian. It's like, but did you even try? No. Well, that's why you don't know. So there are people who are dedicated to ignorance. And so the more, and I hear what you're saying. Sometimes you don't know what needs to happen, but over time, as you just acknowledge the truth, and I think that is part of it is because you have to accept the fact that you're going to lose friends. People might ostracize you, or you might get labels, but all of that is wrapped up into needing acceptance from people who require that you belittle yourselves in order to be around them.
Mhm. I
You
would
know.
say too, and Dr. Ray is a friend. Love a
Mhm.
lot of the work that he's done.
Uh-huh.
Say as a teacher, I feel the responsibility to teach and tell the truth wherever possible. The responsibility, that's my responsibility. The
Hmm.
responsibility of those who hear it is whether or not they will accept it. In the same way that some people will click on this and view this recording at some point, and they can choose whether to accept it or not. But
That's
it's
right.
my duty as a teacher to share it, even though some people have a commitment to ignorance. But at
Yep.
one time in my life, I was committed to ignorance, but I'm so thankful that there were those that would not allow me to maintain that commitment to ignorance by continuing to share with me knowledge of self to the point where I had to renegotiate that commitment to ignorance. So that's my perspective as a teacher, is that we're always trying to put out the information that will tap the
Hmm.
spirit and touch the soul and make a person see things from a different vantage point, and hopefully that it will make them change and transform their lives.
Sharon Brinkley made a point that I think we should mention. It's right in line with what we're saying. She said, I don't think it's that simple. Like we said earlier, mental health is an issue even for the educated. So that's a good point. What kind of mental illness is it when you seek approval from your oppressor and don't want to learn about yourself? So that's kind of a rhetorical question that I'm just going to leave for all of us to think about. I want to get into the project that you're working on for the foundation. Can I go over the table of contents that's in it, and can you give us some information on what that's about?
Sure, sure. As you look at the table of contents, what you'll first see is intersections about illiteracy, incarceration, access, and opportunity gaps. We use the
Mhm.
term access and opportunity gaps to replace the notion of achievement gaps. All over America, you'll hear schools and school districts talking about achievement gaps, the supposed gap between Black student achievement and white student achievement. The languaging of it, calling it an achievement gap, is problematic because we're not interested in the gap between white student performance and Black student performance, especially when white student performance is mediocre or submediocre at best. So we're not trying to be equal to mediocrity, right?
That's
Uh,
right.
if there is the gap is between where Black students are now and Black excellence. That's the gap that we're trying to close. So when people talk about the achievement gap, it obscures attention away from the access and opportunity gaps. The fact that
Mhm.
Black children don't have access to quality schools that are properly funded with certified teachers in the core areas of math, science, social studies, and language arts and reading, right?
Mhm.
They are least likely to be placed in advanced placement courses, as you were. They are most likely to have a teacher who's white and female. All these different kinds of things are problematic. So not having access to qualified Black teachers, to properly funded, equitably funded schools, with not having access to culturally relevant and responsive and/or African-centered education, all of these constitute access and opportunity gaps, and we talk about that in the first section. In the second section, it's literacy and education on the plantation. And I reframed the conversation by saying what we're now calling the preschool to prison pipeline should really be seen as a plantation
Mm.
prison pipeline. Because once the Civil War was fought, and Africans were emancipated, and then the 13th Amendment was passed and so forth, the white terrorists, unified very quickly and rallied to make sure that they would be able to find those captive Africans and recapture them, because they still needed a labor class to produce their cotton and their tobacco and all of their other cash crops and so forth. And so they did that by creating a plantation to prison pipeline. So we talk about that and how that plantation to prison pipeline is really what led to the creation of what today we call law enforcement. So we actually we have pictures of the badges of law enforcement back in the 1800s that started as slave patrols, those who would go and find runaway Africans, and then later they would pass vagrancy laws that if you were just standing around, this is after emancipation, and you could not tell them what plantation you were working on, or what white man you were working for, then you could get snatched up. Men, women, and children. There were children who were captured and placed into this system, which went on all the way up to 1940.
Mm.
Upwards of 800,000 Black people who were trapped in this system. Okay. So imagine the trauma of a mother or a father finding out that their child had been captured, never to be heard from again, and
Yeah.
placed in this system. Imagine the trauma of a child finding out that their mother or father had been captured and placed in that system, never to be heard from again. So this is why I say we're dealing with multi-generational, intergenerational, unaddressed trauma. We talk about the plantation to prison pipeline, Black literacy, and how Black illiteracy and ignorance was weaponized against us and is still being weaponized against us. We talk about the funding disparities, and how those disparities, what monies go to predominantly Black schools. Our public schools today are more segregated than they were back when the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision was made. So, and because they're segregated in that way, it's easier to channel a lack of funding into those spaces. I'm not arguing that our schools should be completely integrated. I'm not, and one of the challenges was our children were bussed out of schools where they were loved and nurtured by Black teachers and leaders.
That's right.
They were bused to white schools where they were terrorized daily. And
Daily.
and so we're saying that you shouldn't have bused Black children. You should have bused equitable amounts of money into the Black community. So there are a number of things we talk about that. We talk about an example of when there was competent, strong Black leadership advocating for African-centered education in public schools and making it happen, outperforming the state. That leadership and those systems were systematically dismantled. And so we use Detroit Public Schools as a case study to demonstrate that, and how that system was completely dismantled. And it was over a bond initiative that was over $1 billion in the hands of Black leaders in Detroit. And when white folk at the state level saw that money, the state immediately swooped in, took over the schools, and dismissed the current school board and put another board in place of their people to control that money, under the guise that they were trying to improve the schools. But the schools were already doing well and outperforming the state average. So there's a lot of different things at play, a lot of moving parts that our people are not aware of, that when you see how this preschool to prison pipeline has been constructed and how it's daily in effect, how the funding inequities are going on, and the cultural identity theft is happening to our children every day, the more that we know about this, then there's the more that we can do something about it. So I cannot impress upon people enough to please check out this report and circulate it as widely as possible. And we may be coming to your city or your community very soon to have one of these forums to discuss it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Akua. And when you have those forums across the country, please just let me know. I want to thank you for coming on to Tuesday Talk and having this very lively conversation, which brought up more questions, which is also something that we need to consider and take a look at. And it also lets us know that we had a good conversation when we have other questions. So I have in the chat, Dr. Akua Zell. We don't, and I have my Cash App as well. We don't do it for money, but we need money to do it. And we would appreciate any donations. I'm also going to update the flyer so that you can see, so that you can know where to go to the foundation, where you can download this guide, and also his Zelle. So thank you so much. Really, Dr. Akua, it's always great to have you here. And thank you so much to everyone who shows up for Tuesday Talk, even when it's on a Wednesday. I really do appreciate it. And I will see you next Tuesday. Mwah. Shema Ma'at.
Peace and blessings, Hotep.